In Medellin during the 1980s, loyalty often meant signing a pact with death. Amid a city ruled by violence, there emerged a short man with sharp, high-pitched voice whose lethal reputation still sends chills down spines today. John Jairo Arias Tascon, known as Penina, is remembered by many as Pablo Escobar's most loyal assassin, a soldier who never once disobeyed his boss's orders. Yet few know that before becoming the most feared shadow of the Medellin cartel, he stood just one step away from death. He had made the unforgivable mistake of stealing from the wrong man. What could have been his end instead opened the door to his transformation into one of the most vital pieces of Escobar's criminal empire. What followed was a life marked by a meteoric rise, absolute power, and blind loyalty that would ultimately lead to his own sacrifice. John Jairo Arias Tascon was born on October 21, 1961, in the Lovena neighborhood, one of the poorest areas of Medellin. He was the fourth of 7 children and grew up in an environment where scarcity not only defined the present but also dictated the future. In the streets, he learned that respect was not asked for. It was earned through strength. His closest friends began calling him Penina, a nickname born from his high-pitched voice, compared to that of a TV actress, and his childlike mannerisms. But that seemingly harmless nickname would soon become synonymous with terror. While other children went to school, he learned a different language, the language of intimidation. In any fight, he was always the first to pull a knife, and his violent temper eventually got him expelled. Instead of changing his course, that moment marked the beginning of a path that would turn him, still a teenager, into a thief, a gang member, and later the right-hand man of local criminal groups. Behind his frail appearance and short stature, barely 1 meter and 54 centimeters, hid a fierce determination, a calculating instinct, and a natural inclination toward violence that set him apart. His small frame contrasted sharply with his ability to evade the authorities. At first glance, he seemed insignificant, but beneath that unassuming figure was an unrelenting cunning and a chilling coldness unusual for someone his age. His mother, a deeply religious woman, watched with anguish as her son drifted further down a dangerous path. Every night she placed him under the Virgin's protection, repeating the same prayer. May the Holy Virgin watch over him. Yet her prayers weren't enough to save Penina from the fate he was choosing for himself. When luck finally turned against him, he was arrested for the first time. Although his time in jail was brief, it was enough to cement his reputation in the eastern neighborhoods of Medellin, where he was already seen as one of the most feared men. But the defining moment of his life didn't come from triumph. It came from a mistake, stealing from the most powerful man in Colombia, Pablo Escobar. Logic dictated that such audacity would surely lead to his death. However, what seemed like a death sentence became the entry point into a world of limitless power. Thus began one of the most intense displays of loyalty ever seen in organized crime. For Penina's story cannot be understood without his transformation, from a street delinquent into the most ruthless enforcer of the Medellin cartel. While public attention was fixated on Escobar, few noticed that in the shadows, a boyish-looking man was rising, willing to kill and die for his boss. In a world where betrayal was common, Penina became the exception. His word meant more than his own life, and it was that unwavering loyalty that elevated him to the top of the criminal world, and later led him to his grave. The relationship between the two was born amid a Colombia drowning in chaos. During the 1980s, the formal economy staggered while an underground business boomed at breakneck speed. Drug trafficking. Medellin became the epicenter of this industry, and its poorest neighborhoods, neglected by the government, turned into fertile ground for recruiting young men willing to do anything to escape poverty. The meeting between Penina and Escobar was no coincidence, but the inevitable collision of two forces destined to meet. After the theft, Escobar sent one of his trusted men, known as El Flaco Calavera, to find him. What seemed like the prelude to his execution ended with an unexpected outcome. Instead of ordering his death, Escobar offered him a place at his side. The boss had noticed something in that thin young man with a high-pitched voice and childlike manners, something few others could see, an enormous potential for obedience, efficiency, and, above all, unconditional loyalty. At first, his entry into the boss's inner circle was quiet. His task seemed simple, delivering messages, carrying bags, or discreetly escorting Escobar's mistresses. But soon, the young man proved that his worth went far beyond those minor missions. The turning point came when the guerrilla Group M19 kidnapped several drug traffickers and their families. The response was immediate. A secret organization was born, NAS Death to Kidnappers, created to avenge the cartel leaders. It was within this group that Penina found his true place. Under that banner, he participated in the capture of insurgent leaders and conducted brutal interrogations that revealed his most ruthless side. Escobar, recognizing his efficiency, began entrusting him with increasingly dangerous missions. The bond between the two grew even stronger shortly afterward, during a trip to the United States, where Penina accompanied Gustavo Gaviria and Escobar himself. In a museum in the American West, he watched in astonishment as those men, who ruled an empire of crime, walked among tourists as if they were ordinary citizens. That contrast between absolute power and the illusion of normality cemented a connection that went beyond a typical hierarchy of boss and subordinate. Meanwhile, in Colombia, the political debate revolved around a decisive issue: the extradition of drug traffickers to the United States. For Escobar, this represented a threat worse than death itself. The possibility of ending up in a U.S. prison set off every alarm within the cartel. Far from being intimidated, Penina took on new responsibilities and became a man in charge of the most dangerous missions. His reputation grew so much that even Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as El Mexicano, called on him to settle disputes in his laboratories, especially when there were lost shipments or internal rivalries. The trust Penina inspired was not only due to his brutality, but also to something much rarer in that world: an unshakable loyalty. Calm, sober, and above all, discreet. He was a man who spoke only when necessary, and in an environment where a misplaced word could mean death. That was an invaluable virtue. To Escobar, Penina was more than just a hitman. He saw in him a born warrior and, at the same time, a meticulous organizer. Over time, he rose to become the main overseer of the cartel's collection offices in Medellin, true nerve centers of the organization. These offices were not mere meeting points, but complex structures coordinating dozens of groups of assassins, each led by lieutenants such as El Chopo and El Negro Pavon. Penina supervised groups like Los Priscos, Los Jesudas, Los Cachos, and Los Naranjitos. It was an armed network that extended its reach across the entire city, capable of infiltrating institutions and establishing intelligence systems so sophisticated that capturing it became nearly impossible. By 1984, that young delinquent from the Lovena neighborhood had become a key piece in the criminal machinery that dared to challenge the Colombian state. And to think that all this power had begun with a simple theft, a mistake that, instead of costing him his life, opened the gates to an empire of unimaginable violence and wealth. Penina's rise within the Medellin cartel was neither slow nor gradual. It was meteoric, almost immediate. With every mission completed, Escobar entrusted him with even riskier tasks, placing him at the hard decisions that would shape the country's history. The ultimate test came in 1984, when the then Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, intensified his crusade against drug trafficking. Lara had publicly exposed Escobar's ties to illegal activities and sought to dismantle the criminal network operating out of Medellin. To the boss, the minister became an intolerable enemy, and the mission to eliminate him was handed to Penina. On the night of April 30th, 1984, the vehicle carrying Lara Bonilla was ambushed in Bogotá. A burst of gunfire ended his life instantly. Although the gunmen who carried out the attack were members of the gang Los Quesitos, the mastermind behind every detail of the assassination was Penina. After the killing, police launched a relentless manhunt for a man known by the alias Franco Naranjo, one of the many false identities Penina used to operate in the shadows. To ensure nothing could tie him to the act, he ordered the execution of Bayer Velasquez's girlfriend, one of the shooters involved in the ambush. This method became his trademark, not only carrying out Escobar's orders, but eliminating any clue or witness who might betray him. He was meticulous, calculating, and, above all, infallible. After Lara's murder, Escobar temporarily fled to Panama, accompanied by his closest men, among them Penina. But the situation was no longer the same. His mission ceased to be limited to killing enemies. He now had to infiltrate the highest ranks of the security forces. The network of informants he built became so efficient that virtually no movement by the police or the army escaped his control. If an operation against a cartel was being planned, Penina learned of it before it even took place. The Colombian state's reaction to the minister's assassination was immediate. The government stepped up its offensive against the Medellin cartel. Escobar, aware of the peril represented by extradition to the United States, founded a clandestine organization known as Los Extraditables, with a motto that summed up their challenge: "We prefer a grave in Colombia to a cell in the United States." From that moment on, violence reached unprecedented levels, and Penina became the chief executor of this campaign of terror. If a journalist dared to write against the cartel, Escobar sent El Monito, as he affectionately called Penina. If a police officer pursued them, the response was always the same: bullets. When Attorney General Carlos Mauro Hoyos issued new arrest warrants against the leaders, Penina answered with a formula he already mastered: first bribes, then intimidation, and that failed, violence. This direct confrontation with the state turned him into an extremely wealthy man. By the mid-1980s, authorities estimated his personal fortune exceeded 500 million Colombian pesos, a staggering amount for someone who, just a decade earlier, had survived among gangs in the streets of Lovena. The young man who once stole to eat now circulated through Medellin's most exclusive neighborhoods. Penina not only enjoyed luxuries he had never imagined, but also bought ranches, apartments, and properties across several municipalities in Antioquia, displaying an apparently inexhaustible wealth. His influence grew by leaps and bounds. In an operation carried out in Bogotá, he traveled with Rodolfo Prisco with orders to eliminate a judge and other figures who threatened the cartel's security. For many of these targets, the mere idea of confronting Penina's power was enough to make them surrender. Some accepted the bribes. Those who did not receive letters signed El Pota, threatening notes that ironically invited the victims to their own funerals. The level of fear that Penina inspired was so deep that even the Medellin police were infiltrated and corrupted. He knew every street in the working-class neighborhoods in detail and used that knowledge to recruit young men willing to become hitmen. He offered them money, motorcycles, and status within the underworld. And when his network suffered losses, he easily found replacements among the hundreds of teenagers who wanted to follow in his footsteps. His role was no longer just that of a hired killer. He had become a strategist, directly facing other renowned gunmen such as Popel, Topo, Don German, and Maradona, perfecting urban warfare tactics alongside them. Escobar and Rodriguez Gacha describe him as the perfect outlaw, not only for his organizational skills, but also for his complete discretion. The days when assassins killed for a dose of bazuco were long gone. Under Penina's coordination, the groups operated like a highly organized military structure, with connections that extended far beyond Colombia's borders. Within the Medellin cartel, surpassing in power several traffickers with many more years of experience. Alongside trusted figures like El Chopo and El Negro Pavon, he was no longer seen merely as a subordinate. He was now treated as a true boss, with his own authority and decision-making power. These companions admired him not only out of fear, but also out of respect, loyalty, and friendship, because behind his violent facade, Penina lived a life filled with very human passions. He spent long hours repairing motorcycles in workshops, loved salsa music, and was an ardent supporter of Atlético Nacional. His devotion to the team was so great that, on more than one occasion, he neglected security measures to attend matches accompanied by his armed men. During police raids on his homes, officers found photographs and jerseys autographed by famous players of the time. This double life reflected his personality. For Penina, loyalty was a sacred principle, a rule he demanded from others with the same strictness with which he practiced it himself. When he discovered that a member of the Cali cartel, known as Piña, had attempted to assassinate his friend El Negro Pavon, he went directly to Escobar to demand justice. The boss, loyal to his lieutenants, demanded that Piña be handed over. But Francisco Herrera, one of the Cali cartel leaders, flatly refused to comply. That act of defiance was not forgotten and became the spark that ignited a bloody conflict. The open war between the Medellin and Cali cartels. In January 1988, the Cali cartel decided to strike at the enemy's heart. A car loaded with explosives was parked in front of the Monaco building, the residence where Pablo Escobar lived with his family. The attackers mistook Fernando Gaviria, Escobar's brother-in-law, for the boss himself and detonated the bomb. Escobar survived, but the attack left several injured and sent a clear message. The war had begun. Medellin's response was immediate. Pinina managed to capture two of those involved, known as El Indio and El Picoso. Through relentless interrogations, he obtained crucial information. The vehicle had been hidden in the Monte Cassino area, and the explosives had been supplied by a Spaniard and an Argentine linked to a farm in Cartago owned by a man nicknamed Rasguno, who was associated with Miguel Rodriguez Orihuela. Escobar's fury was immediate. He threatened to kill Rasguno, who, fearing for his life, sought refuge under protection of Hernando Restrepo, known as HR. Only HR's intervention was able to temporarily restrain Escobar's thirst for vengeance. However, the attack on the Monaco building was not an isolated incident, but rather the beginning of a direct confrontation between the two cartels. Seeking revenge, Escobar ordered an operation in the rival city. Pinina and El Negro Pavon led a squad of gunmen with a mission to eliminate the Cali cartel's leadership. However, upon arrival, they discovered the area was heavily guarded by police who had been alerted in advance about the attack. After several failed attempts, the group returned to Medellin without achieving their goal. The Cali cartel responded with more calculated strategy. It strengthened its ties with sectors of the police and military who were already pursuing Escobar. This alliance turned the conflict into an even more lethal war. Amid this escalation of violence, Pinina suffered one of the most painful losses of his criminal life. His right-hand man, Fabian Tamayo, known as Kairusa, was murdered. Renowned for his brutality, Kairusa controlled gangs in Guayabil and commanded hitmen, such as La Kika, El Perro, and Enchuf. He was also responsible for reinforcing Escobar's security and maintained informants within the police. The news of his death was devastating. Kairusa's body was photographed by his killers, and those images circulated throughout Medellin as a true war trophy. Enraged, Pinina launched a manhunt to uncover who had betrayed his lieutenant. Together with Giovanni Lopera, known as La Modelo, he concluded that the Cali cartel had hired assassins to carry out the revenge, convinced that Kairusa had informed on them. Pinina's response was immediate. He sent a group of hitmen to Bogota, led by his most trusted man, Brinces Munoz, known as Tyson, who, along with his brother Tilton, had been trained by an Israeli mercenary in military tactics and explosives, his cousin Cuco Zabala, a bomb-making specialist, and Giovanni Loper himself, Cuco's nephew. With this loyal team, Pinina perfected a true war machine. His goal was no longer to eliminate specific individuals, but to carry out large-scale operations. He received orders to use car bombs as the main weapon of terror. The war between the Medellin and Cali cartels had reached a new and bloodier level. The Colombian government responded with a direct offensive against the Medellin cartel, offering million-dollar rewards for the capture of Escobar, Pinina, and other members of the organization. Even so, Pinina repeatedly demonstrated his ability to evade the authorities. He had created an ingenious system of repeater antennas that diverted telephone signals, preventing the police from tracking his communications. In addition, his calls were encrypted, making them virtually impossible to intercept. They used childhood memories as secret codes to arrange meetings. Phrases that seemed innocent, like, "Remember when we were kids and used to drink juice at that house? See you there," actually served as hidden coordinates. By 1990, Pinina was not only Pablo Escobar's most feared enforcer, but also one of the most wanted criminals in Colombia. His unbreakable loyalty had elevated him to the highest levels of power within the cartel. Yet that same loyalty made him the primary target of the authorities. The manhunt for him was already underway, and the noose tightened with each passing day. To understand who Pinina was, one must delve into an extraordinary case of absolute obedience within the world of organized crime. He was a man willing to give up his life, his ethics, and his future in the name of another. His character had been shaped early on in a ruthless environment. Growing up in the extreme poverty of the Lovena neighborhood meant fighting every day to survive and earn respect. In a context where the state was practically non-existent, the true figures of authority were the men who ruled the streets. In that world, violence was not a choice, it was an essential tool, and Penina learned to wield it at a very young age. His physical traits also became a decisive factor. Standing only 1 meter and 54 centimeters tall, within almost childlike voice, he turned those apparent weaknesses into a psychological weapon. His victims often underestimated him, and when they faced his brutality, the shock was devastating. His encounter with Pablo Escobar was the ultimate turning point in his life. In Escobar, he found more than a boss. He found someone who recognized his talents, offering him not only power and money, but something he valued even more, validation and a sense of belonging. That bond sealed his fate forever. Pablo Escobar was not just his employer. He became a near-paternal figure. His charisma and leadership filled the emotional void that had marked John Jairo's childhood. The absence of solid role models. That emptiness was replaced by an almost religious devotion. While other lieutenants could be bribed or broken under pressure, Penina remained incorruptible. His loyalty had a concrete foundation. Escobar had spared his life when a logical decision would have been to kill him after the initial theft. What began as gratitude evolved into a far deeper psychological pact. Experts in criminology and psychology have described similar cases, where a subordinate's identity becomes intertwined with that of his leader. That was Penina. There was no separation between his existence and the mission of the Medellin cartel. Attacking Escobar was attacking him. The boss's victories were his victories, and so were his failures. That symbiotic connection explains why he was capable of committing acts of extreme violence without showing any remorse. To him, these were not personal decisions, but actions taken in defense of an ideal he shared with his boss. Paradoxically, within that criminal world, he maintained a personal code of honor. Betrayal was unforgivable, and he demanded from his men the same total devotion he had toward Escobar. Though this code was distorted by brutality, it provided him with a moral framework through which he could justify his actions. His effectiveness as the cartel's military commander wasn't based solely on violence. Penina possessed three rare qualities for a hitman: tactical intelligence, mastery of the terrain, and the ability to inspire his men. He didn't just instill fear. He knew how to earn respect. His subordinates obeyed him not only out of terror, but because they saw him as a true leader. The transformation from a neighborhood gang member into a criminal strategist revealed an exceptional mind that, under different circumstances, could have achieved great things. His ability to build networks of informants, infiltrate institutions, and anticipate law enforcement's moves demonstrated a sharp analytical intelligence. But the same loyalty that had carried him to the top also contained the seed of his downfall. By completely merging his identity with that of Escobar and the cartel, he lost the perspective needed to gauge danger. Instead of lowering his profile as state pressure increased, he intensified his involvement, exposing himself more and more. Behind the feared man were very human passions. He loved soccer, spent hours repairing motorcycles, and enjoyed salsa music. Those hobbies were his escape, his brief contact with the simple life he never truly had. The contrast between the Penina who cheered in the stadium stands and the one who ordered a car bomb to explode reflected the psychological fracture he needed to survive in the world he chose. Deep down, his story is a tragedy. Admirable qualities like intelligence, leadership, and discipline used for destruction instead of creation. In a different environment, with better opportunities and less hostility, those same virtues could have turned him into a completely different man. His life demonstrates how social surroundings and early choices can define a person's destiny. It also shows how a universal virtue like loyalty can become destructive when directed toward the wrong causes. By 1990, the circle around Penina began to close. After years of murders, bombings, and open war against the state, his name no longer inspired only fear. It had become a national target. Colonel Hugo Martinez, leading the search block, was determined to dismantle the Medellin cartel's military structure. He knew that capturing or killing Penina would be a devastating blow to Escobar. After multiple failed raids, authorities managed to intercept a communication at a house belonging to a cartel lieutenant known as El Muger. That clue revealed that Penina planned to visit some relatives in Envigado. An operation was quickly organized to catch him, but as it happened many times before, his network of informants sprang into action. As he headed toward the location, he received a warning call. "Hey, where are you?" "I'm around here, near the supermarket," he replied. "Turn back and walk past the blue car near the restaurant on the corner. Those people are from the law." Penina understood the danger immediately. Within minutes, he began making frantic phone calls and managed to mobilize around 60 armed men with rifles ready to respond. Through the radio, one of his informants managed to send a direct message to General Martinez. "They're setting up an ambush against you. Change your position." The agents immediately relocated, but soon after, another transmission came through. "They're at the upper corner. Let's get them." Outnumbered and at a clear disadvantage, the general ordered retreat. This kind of situation happened repeatedly. Every time the search block got close to capturing him, Penina vanished just moments before. It seemed as though he had a supernatural instinct for sensing danger, but in reality, he relied on a vast network of informants infiltrated at various levels within the security forces. The chase eventually turned into a personal rivalry between Penina and Colonel Martinez. The hitman even attempted to assassinate the officer several times. On one occasion, he sent an infiltrator to the school where the colonel's children studied, but the plan failed. He also tried to poison Martinez's food, without success. Paranoia began to consume the military man. During a routine operation, just 2 minutes after it began, Penina was already warning other cartel members about police movements. Enraged, Martinez confronted Major Aguilar. "You're the mole. Find out who's leaking our information." Exhausted and frustrated, the colonel traveled to Bogota and submitted his resignation. Shortly after, Aguilar contacted him. They had identified the informant who was betraying the search block. Martinez returned to the mission, though morale among the team was shattered after so many failures. Capturing Penina seemed impossible. It was like chasing a ghost that always managed to slip away. But a stroke of luck, or perhaps a miracle, would change the course of the hunt. Penina's housemaid, without him realizing it, frequently spoke on the phone with her boyfriend. That small detail escaped the hitman's attention, but not the authorities. On June 13, 1990, the search block located the young man, who happened to be a low-ranking police officer. He agreed to cooperate and confessed that he often picked up his girlfriend in an area of the El Poblado neighborhood. With this information, the security forces organized an operation and positioned several units at strategic points. The next day, June 14th, agents observed a car driving in circles before parking in front of the building, behavior that raised suspicion. Minutes later, they confirmed what they had been waiting for. Penina was using the phone from an apartment on the 3rd floor. The operation began immediately. The agents surrounded several blocks and stormed the building. When they tried to open the apartment door, they realized it was reinforced. Penina, always cautious, had bulletproofed it. Inside were his wife, his newborn son, and the housemaid. For the first time, he was trapped. True to his habit, he grabbed a submachine gun, made the sign of the cross invoking the Virgin, just as his mother had taught him, and ran toward the balcony. He planned to climb down to reach his car, but the police spotted him from below. Penina opened fire, and the agents returned fire. In the middle of the shootout, he fell from the 3rd floor, hitting the ground violently. Wounded, he tried to get up to return to the building, but another burst of bullets struck him down. John Jairo Arias Tascon, known as Penina, died at the age of 29, riddled with bullets and lying in a pool of blood. That was the official version. However, on the streets of Medellin, another story began to circulate. That Penina hadn't died in the shootout, but had been captured alive and taken to a military barracks in the municipality of Bello, where he was allegedly subjected to brutal torture, including the feared submarine method. His head was repeatedly submerged in containers filled with water until the brink of suffocation, only to be pulled out for a few seconds of air before the torture began again. Despite the beatings and interrogations, he never revealed Escobar's whereabouts. Not because he refused to, but because he truly didn't know. The only outcome was a discovery of documents confirming that the boss had fled Medellin and was likely hiding in the Magdalena Medio region. Escobar's reaction was one of uncontrollable fury. In a statement, he declared that Penina had been executed in front of his wife and small child. Meanwhile, the authorities and the cartel's enemies celebrated the fall of the monster Lovena, one of the most feared men in all of Colombia. On the night of June 14, 1990, around 11 o'clock, fingerprint tests confirmed what was already suspected. The body belonged to John Jairo Arias Tascon. Penina was dead. His wife was taken into custody by a criminal court, while his infant son was placed under protection of Colombian Institute of Family Welfare. Yet his death did not bring the expected peace. On the contrary, it unleashed a new wave of violence. Just hours later, a car bomb exploded in Medellin, followed by a series of murders that shook the entire city. It was a bloody farewell of Pablo Escobar's most loyal lieutenant. Days later, a disturbing photograph reached the cartel boss. In it, Penina appeared severely wounded, escorted by officers leading him to an official vehicle. For Escobar, that image was proof that his hitman had been captured alive and later executed by law enforcement. His response was immediate. "The criminal and murderous police act without honor," he declared, seething with rage at the thought of his trusted man's fate. The death of Penina was not just another episode. It represented one of the most painful blows to the Medellin cartel. General Miguel Maza Marquez, one of Escobar's greatest enemies, even stated that Penina's downfall was, strategically speaking, equivalent to the death of Escobar himself. Beyond the terror his name inspired, the story of John Jairo Arias Tascon mirrors a Colombia fractured by inequality, where poverty and lack of opportunity drove thousands of young men to choose the path of violence. Penina wasn't born a criminal. He was shaped by a hostile environment, by despair, and by choices that led him to a tragic destiny. His blind loyalty to Pablo Escobar, which began with a simple theft and ended in a brutal death, reveals the complexity of human relationships, even within the underworld. In a world where betrayal was common, Penina stood as an exception. He remained loyal until the end, giving his life for a devotion that ultimately consumed him. After his death, the Medellin cartel continued its war against the state, but it had lost its most brilliant military mind. The organization turned into a hydra with many heads. Giovanni Lopera, known as La Modelo, along with El Chopo Tyson and El Irate, kept the flame of terror alive. However, none of them could inherit the deadly combination of intelligence, coldness, and loyalty that defined Penina. By the time he died, he had amassed a fortune in just a decade of service to the cartel, properties across Medellin and Antioquia, and millionaire bank accounts managed through intermediaries. He was buried in the central cemetery of Envigado, beside his mother, Ana Lydia Tascon Rios. The story of John Jairo Arias Tascon transcends that a mere hitman. It is a reflection of a divided nation, where lack of opportunity and violence drove an entire generation down paths of no return. Penina leaves us a profound lesson. Behind every criminal lies a human story marked by choices that at the time seemed inevitable. His legacy stands as a warning. Loyalty, when devoted to the wrong causes, can become a destructive force, one capable of consuming not only those who practice it, but also everything and everyone around them. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Penina, a story of extreme loyalty, boundless violence, and deeply human contradictions. Now we want to hear your thoughts. Was Penina a product of his circumstances, or a man who consciously chose the path of violence? Do you believe his loyalty was his greatest virtue or his greatest mistake? Leave your comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to receive more documentaries about the figures who shaped the history of crime. Your support, by liking and sharing this video, helps us continue investigating and bringing you stories told with depth and precision. See you in the next episode.